hello to everyone tuning in on Zoom, and welcome back to Rabble's Off the Hill live political panel. My name is Libby Davies, and I'm joining you from the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Coast Salish peoples. Joining me tonight is co-host Robin Brown.
Hey, everybody. I am joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Thanks, Robin. Well, with us tonight, our former Green Party Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre, Mike Morris, former provincial NDP MPP for Ottawa Centre and federal candidate for Ottawa Centre, Joel Harden, activist and poet Elle Jones, and Rabble's own senior parliamentary reporter, Karl Nerenberg. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome also to our audience joining us on Zoom tonight. We hope you participate in the chat function and ask questions to our panelists. You'll have an opportunity to do that through our Q&A, and we'll do our best, as always, to address your questions that come up. Well, when we last came together for Off the Hill, the federal election was just 12 days away. Since then, we've seen the election of a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and the appointment of his new cabinet. But of course, there's still much to discuss. In the recent election, both the NDP and the Green Party experienced notable drops in support as a surge in Liberal and Conservative votes dominated the election. So tonight on our panel, we'll be digging into what comes next, both on and off Parliament Hill, and how to advance key progressive policies and how to navigate activism in an increasingly centrist political climate. Over to you, Robin.
All right, thanks, Libby. All right, well, to start, a question for everybody. Let's get your general reflections on the federal election result. What surprised you? So why don't we start with Joel, then go to Mike, then Elle, then Karl. Joel.
Well, thanks, Robin and Libby and everybody and folks tuning in for this opportunity to have this conversation tonight. Robin, if I'm going to think about what surprised me, I'll begin with the obvious. I mean, we were all looking at a Liberal Party which was in utter disarray before the end of last year, coming into this year. And I've been following politics for a long time. I have never seen an about face like we have just seen. And I think it had a lot to do with events south of the border, but we've seen the rise of demagoguery and fascism around the world. It's not just about south of the border. And sometimes as Canadians, we're a little too cute about the presence of hatred in our own communities. So I'm mindful of that, Robin. I'm mindful of the fear and the anxiety that's in our communities right now. I certainly hear it every day from folks at home. And mindful of the fact that despite all of that, I still think we are capable of some pretty impressive and amazing things as Canadians. I've seen a lot of people enjoying the tactic of boycotting and sanctioning the United States, as Canadians did in the 1980s with South Africa, as many Canadians are asking us to do with the case of Israel right now. So I'm mindful that this is a very difficult time. People are suffering. People are having a hard time. They're anxious. But I also know that we're a very powerful group of communities in this place we call Canada. So hopeful for our conversation tonight that we will explore that despite the difficult conditions.
Thank you. Before we go to Mike, I do want to throw in, you said you'd never seen an about face like this. What wasn't Trump's an about face like this?
Sorry, Robin, that was for me.
Well,
Yeah. So, sorry, I thought you were referring to Mike. I heard Mike's name. I don't want to.
No, it's like Mike coming out on, but yeah, I'm curious to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never seen. Well, first of all, a few things. I mean, I've never seen a reversal of fortune for a federal political party. And we are talking about the Liberals, however. This is the party that has been able to encapsulate many kinds of different political space for the history of itself, which is the history of this place, this country we call Canada. So a 26-point lead blown from Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre losing his own riding in my greater community here in Ottawa. These are all highly unexpected things. So, I mean, there's a lot of little details in here. Robin, you and I living in Ottawa will know that a lot of neighbors had been organizing behind the Bruce Fanjoy campaign for 2 years leading up to that result. So the national winds changed, but there was an organizing effort in Carleton, including New Democrats I know, I work with, who happen to live out there, particularly veterans and people who've been fighting for justice for veterans living with post-traumatic stress, and they felt Mr. Poilievre had all but ignored them. So the veterans community in that riding of Carleton organized en masse in that particular moment, as well as many others. So yes, I've never seen an about face like this. And it's, Elle, you're in Nova Scotia, my partner's from Nova Scotia. Claire's mom always says, we can't control the wind, but we can adjust our sails. But man, that was a lot of wind. And some people were able to, like Mr. Fanjoy and others, were able to adjust their sail and take advantage of it. But it certainly had the opposite effect for my party. And we're doing a lot of soul searching right now about where we go from here.
Okay. All right. No, thanks. Mike, over to you from the election. What surprised you?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to Rabble for having me tonight. It's a real honor being on this panel with both Joel and Al. Libby, as someone who has followed your work for some time in Ottawa, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm calling in from the Haldimand Tract. It's Block 2 of the Haldimand Tract, what we know as Kitchener today, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Adirondack people. To answer the question, though, Robin, I would first of all just agree with Joel. The shift, of course, like that's one of the main stories of this election. With only a change in leader that is further to the right, to see that kind of shift in fortunes is surprising. But to add something new, I would also say just the number of really incredible parliamentarians who did not get reelected. A lot of colleagues of mine in this last session. It's one of my big disappointments when I think about, Joel mentioned Haza already, if I think about the people who are going to be standing up against genocide and for human rights, there are fewer in this parliament, and also just outside of the issues, just those that were working hard, working across party lines, people like Taylor Backrack in BC, just like hardworking, eloquent community champion. And so it was surprising and disappointing to me to not see folks like that go back. There are many others who are going back, who are incredible parliamentarians. And it reminds me of how much we will need to continue to apply pressure on the causes we care about to make sure that that folks are being heard across the country in this parliament.
Thank you. Elle, what surprised you?
Well, I lack the capacity to be surprised, Robin. I will say, that, like many people, I had high hopes on Poilievre losing his seat, and we were certainly, I think the Stornoway squatters memes are some of the funniest things to come out of this election. Can I tell a joke that I didn't make up that's mildly offensive, I guess? Did you hear the joke? What's the difference between Pierre Poilievre and a toilet?
What?
They're both full of shit, but at least a toilet has a seat.
Now, as a host, I shouldn't laugh at that. So go on.
Okay, I didn't make it up. I'm just sharing it. I'm just passing it on. Retweets and not likes. So no, I think obviously I think everyone's already said, that it looked like we were all saying there was just a 100% Poilievre victory, 6 months ago, and now we're at a liberal minority. I will say that we also saw this dynamic in the States with Biden. It's a dangerous one, right? Where everybody votes because they're like, oh no, chaos incoming. Let's vote for this unradical centrist who wants to keep everything the same. And we saw how under Biden that then turned into a second, much worse and much more radical Trump term. So I think there's always this danger that the right, we're calling them centrists, they're not. There's like soft right-wing liberals that come in that institute all kinds of austerity politics, conservative politics, completely abandon the progressive wing under the name of like normalcy, civility, being the adults in the room, etc., which just ends up alienating the left. It doesn't actually capture any of the people that are furious with them, which is the huge populist conservative base. And it ends up basically disillusioning and demotivating the actual people in the center. And the dynamic that leads to is often an even harder resurgence of the right. So I think that's going to be the worry coming up, is that Carney's going to govern like the banker he is. And I don't think this is the time for that. And I don't know if this, like, it was successful during the campaign to just pull this, like, I'm the adult here, like I'm wearing a suit, I'm not crazy. And, people wanted this idea of like a calm daddy or something in that moment, but I don't know how it's going to rise to meet the occasion in this like completely crumbling crisis world, right? So That's my concern coming out, is I think we've seen this happen already, and we've seen the massive failure of this kind of politics. And when you abandon like your progressive wing, and when you lose all sight of like progressive politics, it actually leads to not the adults in the room winning with the center, but a hard shift to the right. So.
Yep. No, thank you for that. And Carl, over to you.
I think Elle made a good point about that. Winning the election is the tiniest bit of the challenge for Carney and the current Liberals. Is what do you do now? And it's a little bit unclear as to where they're going to go. But what's a number of things that surprised me, to answer your question, to do it justice. I think I wasn't surprised at the turnaround that had the Liberals leading, but because at the time of the election, that had already been established, not just in the polling, but in the anecdotes. Like when I went into the supermarket, people, apolitical people, I gather, were all talking about very contemptuously about Poilievre, connecting him to Trump and saying we've all got to rally together as a country and get behind somebody to fight off Trump. So that seemed to be very much the zeitgeist. So what surprised me is that it didn't actually do as well as it might have when predicted by the general atmospherics. What surprised me in a way is how well the Conservatives did. And what surprised me is in a way there were two elections. There was the election of the one cohort of people, and I think a lot of it was generational. And they tended, this first cohort, to be older, not as old as me, but older than the older group. And they were really incredibly seized with the idea that there is a fascist, a unhinged fascist in the White House who actually wants to take over Greenland, take over our country, wage economic war on us. And we were pretty aware that we had weakened ourselves for over the last 50, 60 years, becoming far too integrated with the United States, and that we're making it easier for somebody who wants to pick on us. And some of us who knew history knew the Americans have long had ambitions to take over all or part of Canada or our resources. So that group of people went liberal, and the part of that group who had been the NDP or Green massively deserted them. I remember just meeting people. It's like, for the first time in my life, I'm not going to vote NDP. I'm going to vote Liberal, just because of this aspect. But the other group were, I'm dissatisfied. I'm annoyed. I'll never be able to buy a house. Groceries are too expensive. I find the government, maybe it's too cute and too woke by half. And I got sick of Trudeau, and I'm not so sure this is big change. And they jumped on the Conservative bandwagon. I mean, Poilievre was right when he said, this is the best result the Conservatives have had since 1984, 88 or something. I mean, so yes, they lost. So, that's, the records of that sort are only for losers, but that poses a very dangerous situation going forward. That's a huge, huge vote for the Conservatives, huge support for the Conservatives. We had also the paradox of strategic voting in southwestern Ontario and other places, where confused progressives and confused working class people who jumped from the NDP to the Liberals elected Conservatives, but some of them also jumped to the Conservatives. So that is
I'm going to jump in right there, because we're actually going to move over to strategic voting. So I'm just, if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in and bring Joel back in. I know we want to get into what's next, but let's just stick for a little bit with the actual election itself and what happened and your reflections. Joel, I know you ran a very energetic campaign. I kind of watched from afar on the West Coast. It was a fantastic campaign. But as everybody has said, strategic voting, it was clearly a huge factor in the outcome. So I guess a couple questions. What lessons are you drawing from that? And we will get into the question of electoral reform later on in our questions to you, but just in terms of the strategic voting, as Karl referenced, and what do we draw from that? And also, if you just want to reflect a little bit on how are you seeing the NDP's immediate role in Parliament? And well, there's the leadership race as well coming up. With Jagmeet Singh resigning as leader. So that's a lot of questions, but just reflections you have on strategic voting and what's next for the NDP, really.
Well, look, I will say a few things, Libby. First of all, Canadians have said from coast to coast to coast that we want electoral reform. We want it. But in the absence of the two major parties offering it, despite promises from the Liberals to do so, they do it as well as they hope to do at the polls. This is what we experienced here in Ottawa Centre. We had 50,000 votes for the Liberal candidate in Ottawa Centre. That is historic. No one has ever registered an outcome like that here at any level of politics. And I think they wanted to send Poilievre and Trump a message. It's very clear to me. So when I have neighbors approach me at home, regretfully saying, "Oh, Joel, I decided not to back you this time," there's not a hint of anger in my mind. I know people wanted to send a message. I get it. The question is for the party, for the NDP, how do we understand this moment? As I said before, referencing that East Coast metaphor I got from my partner's family, we cannot control what swirls around at the top of politics as local community activists. If we try to, we'll drive ourselves mad. But what we certainly can control is how we react to this moment. Mr. Carney's got a lot of contradictions he's got to manage with the daily sideshow in the White House. He's been hired for that job, and we'll see if he can actually pull that off. He also, if I give credit to him, talked about some significant changes to our political economy that our party has been proposing, as you know, Libby, for 40 years, all the way back to Mel Watkins and Ed Broadbent and Rosemary Brown, people who were saying, we want to actually use the stuff that we make here for here. We want to be a model of an independent, resilient economy that serves our communities. And we want to encourage that all around the world. This is what New Democrats have been saying for 40 years. So Mr. Carney is talking about reverse integration of the economy, closing supply chains. Here locally in Ottawa, we actually have a situation where our neighbors on the other side of the Ottawa River in Gatineau in Quebec, they have a completely different hydroelectricity system. If we were to connect with that system, we would make game-changing moves in our emissions reductions. But decades of Liberal and Conservative politicians have said no. And why? Because Enbridge wants to bring up fracked natural gas from the United States to compensate for how we draw down our electricity in the province of Ontario. But if Mr. Carney is serious, this is what I'm hearing from local community activists, Libby, in the NDP and outside. We're going to hold him to these promises. We're still going to be the official opposition in our city. We don't need an elected seat to do that. We need an active citizenry, and we have that. We have that in Ottawa Centre, and I know that exists all over the country. Now, as for the leadership race, this is a really important moment for the federal NDP. We have to decide what will lead us back into electoral relevance. What is absolutely beyond debate is that we have political relevance in every community in this country. It doesn't matter what happened in these larger national wins, international wins that impacted this result. Our party is respected in big communities, small communities, suburban communities, rural communities, urban communities like mine. We have that. The question is, are we going to look for a leader who's going to make sure we can build on that local expertise that we have by encouraging community organizing at a local level? Or are we going to rely on very high-priced consultants in Ottawa, in Toronto, and Vancouver to direct us from above? That is, I think, the debate we need to have. And I'll end by saying it's not always straightforward. I believe we need a well-funded national leadership. I believe that national leadership needs good advice. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. But to give you, I'll end with an anecdote. As I served at Queen's Park in Toronto, and we went over the budget for the 2022 provincial election campaign, we had a $7 million budget for that campaign. $5 million of that $7 was spent promoting our leader, who had run as our leader 4 times. And many of us said to ourselves, why did we do that? Why didn't we get people booked off work as bona fide candidates a year ahead of the vote? In the other major political parties, and Mike, I know you work on this premise too, like you get ready long ahead of the writs being issued. You listen to what community members want to see happening in their community long before the writs are issued. And I want to see our party emulate that model. But it takes really intentional investment. It takes sitting down with local folks who want to make that risk, put themselves out, and then build a community of people around them. If we want a federal leader who's going to focus on organizing, I think the sky's the limit for the NDP, and frankly, any other political party.
Thanks, Joel. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Mike, being excluded from the federal election leadership debates undoubtedly impacted the Green Party to some degree. How would you define the challenges that lie ahead? And do you see this as a period of maintaining the status quo or one of potential growth?
Well, Robin, the challenges that lie ahead are the housing crisis. It is folks with disabilities disproportionately living in poverty across the country. It is the gouging of the oil and gas industry and grocery chains that continue to get by unabated, whereas other countries around the world have long put in place windfall profit taxes to return that to communities to invest in good transit. We're still the only country in the G7 without high-speed rail. Our emissions are the only one in the G7 that continue to go up. And so I think you're asking about the Green Party. But in my view, political parties are a means to an end to achieve outcomes for people. And the challenges for folks in this country on any of those fronts, all of them have gotten worse. To Karl's earlier, I don't fully agree with the kind of two buckets of people that Karl shared about earlier. But the fact that anybody who cares about the housing crisis would see any solutions in the Conservative Party is a failure amongst those who have real solutions to communicate those widely. Solutions like making sure that when the government of Canada builds so-called affordable housing, that the homes are actually affordable for regular folks. Because right now, you look at the Affordable Housing Fund, and 70% of the units built with that fund, the developer can charge whatever they want. The remaining 30% is 80% of market rent. And here in Kitchener, there's nothing affordable at about 80% of market rent. We need to get that definition returned to true affordability, which is no more than 30% of income for average folks. We need to build affordable housing the way they used to back in the 70s. We need to lift folks with disabilities out of poverty. And it's my view, and yes, of course, I believe that as Greens, when you elect community champions, you elect folks who are going to rise above the partisan rhetoric to get things done. But it's not only Greens. I think this idea that any one party is uniquely positioned to solve things is some fanciful rhetoric that only serves the parties and doesn't serve real people. I think we need to get anyone in I'd say again, being here with Joel, when folks like Joel get elected, good things happen for people. Those who are willing to share credit to actually get things done. Libby got a ton of things done in her time as an MP, for example. I think the challenge is getting power returned to parliamentarians, wrestling it away from political parties, moving from the politics of personality to the democracy you're hearing from Joel, the citizenry that is actively engaged, and making sure that political parties are accountable, including the Green Party. And that is, to me, trying to answer the core of your question, what the future of the Green Party is. To me, it's about staying true to ensuring when you see folks like Mike Schreiner and Peter Bevan Baker and Elizabeth May, these are folks who go to their legislatures focused on people and progress for their communities ahead of getting a clip for a donor that doesn't actually serve us at all and just feeds party coffers. And I think as Greens, if we follow that, we will be stronger, but more importantly, Parliament will be stronger, and we don't need to be the only ones who are focused in that way.
Thanks, Mike. That's very, very thoughtful. Karl, bringing you in now. So let's kind of turn to the Prime Minister's role. Mark Carney, you've been a long-term watcher of Parliament Hill. So we have another minority parliament, 2 seats short of a majority for him. A brief respite from Poilievre. He probably won't return to the House in the fall. So I'm curious to see what it's like without him and his toxic approach in question period for a little bit, but maybe somebody else will pick it up. But Carney's fiscal conservatism, is that going to set us back? And how do you see Carney playing it out, Karl, in terms of the role that he's now going to play in Parliament with, not quite the majority?
Well, I am mindful of what Joel said, which was giving Carney a lot of latitude and a lot of benefit of the doubt, which is probably a wise thing to do. But I think that what I worry is that he's focused, as Joel was describing, on creating economic sovereignty, on reshaping our economy so that it's more sovereign and independent. And yes, I remember the days of Jim Laxer and Mel Watkins and the waffle wing of the NDP, the slogan "An Independent Socialist Canada" that we should have heeded. I also remember the federal election campaign of 1988, where the Liberal campaign advertisement was a pencil eraser erasing the Canada-US border if Mulroney's trade deal with Reagan went through. But I mean, he's got a huge history. We're such an illogical country, economically speaking, since so many of the natural economic links are north-south, not east-west, that he's got a huge history to fight against. And my great worry about him is he kept talking about, I'm a pragmatist and I want to catalyze private sector activity. My worry about catalyzing the Canadian private sector is that the private sector, whether it's Canadian, American, British, French, or Nigerian, is as a fellow who, my namesake, Mr. Marx, noted many decades ago, beholden to nobody, loyal to nobody except itself and profit. So I think a major solution for Canada is to get back in the business of cooperatively and state-owned enterprise in a much bigger way. That the one institution that we all own collectively, the state, should not just be going around partnering and catalyzing, but it should actually be making things happen. And I think that could be the beginnings of a policy for the NDP. So I think Carney is, one thing about him, I think he may be open to thinking about things. So I think one has to present policy to him in a tangent, not in a rhetorical, sloganeering way, but in a really practical, this is an actual policy that we could implement. Just as it happens on the radio before I signed on here was saying, here's a guy who says we can start making a Canadian car again. So there's an example. But for much of that, you can't count on the private sector. And we in Canada have used the resources of the state far more than the Americans in proportion to what our economy is. Look across all the provinces, provincial electrical utilities. They're virtually none in the United States. It's all in the private sector. You can look, at one time we had Connaught laboratories that produced vaccines owned by the federal government. Mulroney sold it.
All right. Well, thank you, Karl. Let's bring let's bring you back in. One senses that Canadians overall drew a kind of a collective sigh of relief that Poilievre didn't break through, and yet we do face many challenges with a prime minister who comes from the global banking world. How do movement activists even begin to make headway on core issues pertaining to climate and racial justice and growing inequality?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this. I was forced to watch the debate for work, like for the preach. Otherwise, I'd have never sat through it. But we saw this in the debate, right, where everyone basically competed over how much more they all loved oil in prisons. So it showed that certain ideological narratives have taken root that are not being challenged even by the left. Sorry, Joel, not you personally, but the idea that, for example, it's environment or jobs, and everybody conceded to this idea. Like, of course, we all need these pipelines. The only person even gently pushed back on that was Blanchet because he was on the English stage, like in Quebec, and everybody else sort of went along with the idea that it'd somehow be unthinkingly radical to shift our energy profile. So there was like no discussion of climate change in any real way. And in fact, what had happened is, a narrative was accepted that either you can fight for climate change or you can have prosperity. And that should have been pushed back upon. Similarly, of course, on the issue of like crime in prisons, everybody accepted wholesale. I remember, I mean, it was Singh that was basically like, look, we all are against like murderers and stuff, without pushing back on the tough on crime rhetoric and pointing out not only that it doesn't work and that it's costly, but that it's a mythology, right? So what was really alarming about that debate was, like, who needs conservatives when we're all willing to take on the conservative talking points and bandy them around as if they're our own, and have like no courage to push back on them? And so one of the current narratives, which comes out of this constant propaganda around woke, which nobody can define, right? Anything's woke that people don't like and makes people uncomfortable, and you get, like, you know, the woke CIA, as if that makes sense, the woke police force, you know. So in this so-called anti-woke, this mythology again, that things like defunding the police that never actually happened, because the police got more funding than ever. But, you know, one of those mythological narratives is, we defunded the police and now crime has risen, so the wokes have, you know. And like, this is the kind of narrative we're working with, where it's been accepted that the progressive movement is doomed because we like pronouns, and, you know, we wanted to defund the police, and we don't hate trans people, so, you know, therefore we're a clown, you know, organizing, like it. So how do you, out of that, then actually have a material rhetoric around an organization around things like racial justice, when we've accepted that that somehow demonized as woke, counterproductive identity politics, counter to working class politics, etc. Like, you know, all of these narratives have just been allowed to grow. So our problem is, first of all, is like pushing back on that heavily at a time when, again, like, we've seen all of our parties shift to the right and accept that. So what even, we know, this has always been said in the States, and it's true in Canada as well, that a lot of these parties would rather lose to conservatives than win with progressives, right? And I don't think that's not the case in Canada as well. As far as what is happening with organizing, I've been hardened by watching the Columbia graduations. I don't know if anybody else is watching it, but if you're watching the presidents and deans get like booed and jeered to the point where they have to switch to music and like can't keep talking. And I think, I mean, that's a sign of something, right? I think what those students are absolutely correct, that the civility politics and not the time and place, and you have to respect the occasion, all those things that used to silence us have been used in order to conduct a genocide and to silence opposition. And there is real anger and real opposition. So I take that as a sign of what politics is going to look like from us, and has to look like, which is, first of all, that all these war criminals and complicit actors should not be able to go anywhere in public without being heartily booed, jeered, and called to account for the genocide they have created and they have cheered on and they have roped us into. And that's a starting point for our politics. I think Palestine, the reason why it's important is Palestine is, and there's a great editorial, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name, who wrote it, in the Globe and Mail, saying that Palestine isn't a single issue, it is the issue, because it connects to all other issues. You can't have environmental justice and support a settler colonial colony that destroys the biodiversity and environment in Israel, and of course war, which is the number one polluter of the environment, that poisons the environment. You cannot have an environmental movement and be for war. You cannot have an anti-racism movement and accept the violent Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Blackness that underlies so much of this rhetoric. You cannot have a racial justice movement and then scream deport them at everyone who disagrees with you. You cannot have any kind of justice movement without fundamental civil rights around protest, free expression, etc. So all of this has been magnified by Palestine, and it's not just about Palestine. It's about this fundamental moment where our rights to protest, our rights to speak, our rights to dissent, our rights to organize, and on labor, like we've seen strikes being broken. Ottawa just got a bunch of new police forces, which are clearly going to be used to break up more protests. You know, this is where we're at. So we have to be ever more organized, ever more creative. We really are going to have to reach across our solidarities, because we're in like this serious times, right? So yeah.
Well, thanks, Elle. And I gotta say, I just love how our Rabble panelists always connect everything. You know, you guys are just, I mean, not just this panel, but it's been a pattern all along of people, the panelists being connecting the dots in terms of issue to issue. And that sort of brings me, I think, to the next question, which is, you've all referenced this, but here we are driven by an electoral system in Canada that sort of drives us down to this lowest common denominator of a two-party system, as we see in the States, which is very problematic. You know, we see the outcome in this last federal election. So the question, because I know lots of folks are interested in electoral reform, was not part of the debates in the election. So how do we focus on that? How do we activate that for people? You know, the last time we left it, Trudeau had made a promise. He broke that promise. It sort of seems dead in the water, but is it? I mean, it seems a very central thing to how we progress in our country in terms of diversity, voices, a pluralistic system. So let maybe Mike and then Joel and Karl and Elle, if you just got comments on how do we focus attention on the electoral system itself? Mike.
Well, we just amplify the folks across the country who are not forgetting the promise 1,800 times that 2015 would be the last under first past the post. I can say in Kitchener, there are thousands of people who are deeply angry that we're stuck as one of the last countries using this regressive, divisive, winner take all, first past the post. And it's a pretty simple idea that every vote should count. And so to me, that means building up the folks like Fair Vote Canada that have never stopped their advocacy. They are the reason why I brought forward Motion 76 in the last Parliament calling for a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. We did that just prior to the Liberal Party's convention, where the same text was on the floor of their convention. The motion passed. The Liberal Party, their grassroots, supports a citizens' assembly, which is just like a regular group of people, like a jury, getting input from experts to departisan, depoliticize, and make recommendations to Parliament on the best path forward for Canada, which may include proportional representation, but doesn't even presuppose an outcome of any kind. It meant that we got to put to the Prime Minister the fact that his own party supports electoral reform, at least the Citizens' Assembly. 86% of Canadians in a recent ECOS poll support a Citizens' Assembly as well. And that's actually the reason why, when it got tabled to a vote, it was Lisa Marie Barron, an NDP MP in BC, who then brought that same motion forward. I drew a low number in the lottery draw. Lisa Marie drew a better number. She was kind enough to work with me and Daniel Blakey and bring that motion forward. The largest number of MPs in the last parliamentary session to break party rank and vote for anything was that particular motion. It was motion 86. 39 Liberals and 3 Conservatives joined with every Bloc, NDP and Green MP. Of course, it's insufficient when you have the 2 large parties who are still voting against. But if you look at why those 39 Liberals and 3 Conservatives, why would they do that in that instance? It was because local volunteers, constituents of theirs, met with them, demonstrated their numbers, and made clear how important this issue was to them. And so I'll hand off because others have great insights on this. But from my perspective in Parliament these last 4 years, to me, there's like a case study there of moving the needle through the engagement of the folks across this country who are pissed off that 10 years later we're stuck with this model that doesn't fairly accurately, and at provincial levels too. Maybe Joel wants to talk about, the percentage of people who voted for a party that has 100% of the power at Queen's Park. And Joel, what are the numbers? Like 18% of Ontarians voted for the party with 100% of the power. Like, it's not only federally, it's in Quebec too. This just doesn't make sense. And Canadians are trying to make that clear and get heard through the political parties that are trying to do everything that they can to push it to the corner.
Okay. We've just got a few minutes on this because we do want to move to our audience questions next. There's a few coming in. So Joel, Karl, Elle, if you just want to weigh in quickly, if you've got any additional thoughts on the electoral reform question and how we focus it, how we get it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Mike for that incredible story of that incredible work. That's amazing. I guess I would say, Libby, this. So I have a very good friend at home from Fair Vote Canada, Rael Laverne. If you're watching this, Rael, thank you for all your work. But Rael knows this is a disagreement he and I have, and I think it's a friendly one that I'll air here. I don't think having door-knocking leaflets on electoral reform for every single home in Ottawa Centre moves the needle. So what Mike was just describing moves the needle. Right? Like getting into conversations with your neighbors, organizing collectively, pressing decision makers, finding ways to tap into the popular mood in your community, that moves the needle. What I have seen increasingly in this digital age of campaigning is a lot of splashy ads, and when it's embodied in a physical leaflet, it's a lot of dropping lit into people's boxes. And I see advocates of electoral reform getting more and more frustrated with that strategy because it's not yielding results, because the big teams, as Mike just said, they don't want to give it to us, right? So here's what I would say. Maybe it's worth asking the question, why did Poilievre commit before the last election to not reverse the dental care reform? Why did Poilievre commit before the last election to not reverse the gains that were made on diabetes medication and contraception? I would say that's because advocates on those issues have done the groundwork. They've been in the community. They pushed the decision maker. If Poilievre wanted to try to take those away as prime minister or Carney, there would be hell to pay. So I would just say there's work to do on electoral reform, Mike, to build on the great work that you did on the Hill, to make that issue that untouchable. But we're just not there. And in the absence of that, as I was saying before, what voters in Canada will do is whatever they think they can with the system they have to try to torque the result. And I told you what that meant here. They sent a very clear message to the country here in Ottawa Centre, and I took it very seriously. So I guess I would say, like, there's more work to do on that front, but dropping lit and splashing ads is not enough.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Carl or Elle, anything to add on? No? Okay.
I just
Yep.
want to add
Please.
one thing.
Yep.
I think the electoral reformers would do their cause a hell of a lot of good if they stopped associating it with one kind of reform, proportional representation. I personally think that if we had more or less the Australian system, the instant runoff, or the French system, the actual runoff, that would have yielded very different results last time. If people knew they could rank their choices, people who might have felt what they were feeling, all the same feelings, would feel not afraid to rank NDP 1, Liberal 2, and end the ranking there. But I think it's a mistake to turn the world into a PR or nothing, and I'm afraid that's what's happened. I think we have to be very open-minded about reform.
Yeah, and I think that Mike's suggestion about a citizens' assembly, we had that in BC, and actually the option that was concluded was preferential voting, and it actually got more than 50% of a vote in a referendum, but it didn't go through because the premier of the day, Gordon Campbell, had set a threshold of 60%. So it lost, I think, well, by 2%. Anyway, I'm sure we'll come back to this, but we want to go to audience questions. One that's come in for Mike. What should Greens do to best participate in federal politics for the next 2 years?
I would say it's not a unique question to Greens. What do we all need to be doing to participate in federal politics? Because we're going to need, I love that term, Joel, the active citizenry. Of course, Greens have one elected member right now, which this person might be getting, and that is Elizabeth May. But I think we need to be getting behind all progressives, and that includes the 7 NDPers who are going back, to make sure that they know they'll be affirmed in their strong positions, whether that's on climate, the way that this whole thing about pipelines, like where are we right now? How is it that at this moment, we just wasted $34 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline? It's not at capacity. We're never going to get our money back. It is a moral and economic failure. The fact that that's the question of the day, that the carbon tax took the amount of time it took. And so maybe one thing we can be thinking of is affirming those from any party, the Bloc are on the right side of climate, for example, from any party who are on the right side of the issue, make sure that they know that they can be bold in their positions and not having to be, that they have constituents who are going to back them in those strong positions, and applying pressure on those who aren't there yet. Because I think that short story on electoral reform is just one example of where by reaching out, showing the numbers you have, by making sure that that MP knows that it's not just a form email and you walked away, but that issue is one that you deeply care about. You have 5 neighbors and friends who feel the same way, and applying that pressure. That's true for ensuring that Greens, follow suit, but it's bigger than that. I think it's about making sure our parliament, for folks to recognize that our democracy is not only held at election time, but it's all the way through.
Yeah. Well, Joel, do you want to add anything on that in terms of what you see that the NDP needs to do?
Well, I think I've spoken on that already, Libby, and I'm mindful that
Yeah.
other viewers
Okay.
have
All right.
questions, and I think Mike captured that really well.
Yeah. Okay. Robin?
Yeah. All right. We have another audience queue, and I'm really glad that this this came in. It kind of, the question says everything, and I'll open this up to everybody. So it says, how do you respond to this quote from an April 12th CBC article titled "How Young Men Are Changing What Conservatism Looks Like in Canada"? And the quote is, underlying the cultural conservative mindset is also the belief that society has lurched radically to the left in recent years, propelled by progressive movements or social movements such as Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and Land Back. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Robin, can I have a quick word? Or Elle, you go first. I'll go after
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always a backlash when there's a perception that a dominant group that holds power sees in any way that power not even being eroded, but other people sharing that power. And again, if you live in a society based on domination, which is a capitalist society, there's an idea, this is austerity politics, that there's only so much to go around. So therefore, if you don't hold all the power, it can't be possible that others can share that position and it can be equalized. It means that you're losing something, right? So this is the message that's being sold to dominant groups, what Desmond Cole has called the angry white majority in peace. That if we give other people rights, that somehow takes away from your rights. So the way to protect your position is to therefore reject immigrants or, reject Black people or, knee-jerk support whatever movements that are against justice. With that said, there genuinely is a problem for young men. We know that the education system is not serving young men adequately. We know there's a mental health crisis. This is not caused by feminism, though. This is actually caused by the pressures of capitalism. When we have many of the traditional jobs that men could do are the jobs that have been, removed. So like industry jobs like fishing, whatever it is, the jobs that men could do without, say, a college education, those jobs have disappeared. Women are always in these low income, like service jobs, caring for children and stuff, but the male jobs have disappeared in a certain extent, and we haven't been able to replace that. But that wasn't caused by women. It's not that women took those jobs. It's that they got shipped offshore and that capitalism is not generating jobs. The mental health crisis among young people in general, which also includes men, is not because of women not wanting to be raped. It's because of the social conditions we live in. So there is a genuine crisis, not only among young men, but among young people in general, which is also shared by men. And we know that educational outcomes, employment outcomes, and particularly things, and this is then fed online by ideas that you're entitled to a woman. And if a woman doesn't, want to date you, that's their problem. And, so these very retrogressive ideas around gender that are radicalizing young men as well. So I do think that we should be attentive to, how the economy is working. Like all of these things that we talk about. The thing is, everything that we want in a justice movement benefits everybody. As we say, a high tide rises all boats, right? Like housing policy also means young men get houses. Employment policy means young men get jobs. Social assistance means young men get those things. Free post-secondary education means young men get those things. So the idea that the things that we want somehow exclude particularly young white men is a myth. In fact, when we give to the people who are most vulnerable in society, those things always trickle up. There is no program that's going to exist for marginalized people that isn't also going to benefit people from other groups. So it's a false narrative. It's one that, again, is widely accepted. And it's one we, again, have to keep pushing back on. I know I'm giving a long answer. I'll shut up. Yeah.
No, I want to go to Joel, but just to clarify, the title of the article was "How Young Men Are Changing," not "How Young White Men." Just want to clarify that, but right. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, Robin, just to build on what Elle just said, you know what my mind goes to? My mind goes to the latest report, and Mike will remember the office that did it federally, but it was the issue around foreign interference. And everybody was expecting that there were going to be politicians named who were compromised. And what the report actually said, and Mike, you can correct me on the details, was that the biggest form of interference in our political process is disinformation and organized disinformation within our country. And when I think about young men, particularly young straight men, in my own life, people I love, people who are younger than the age of 25, I have noticed the impact of the Joe Rogan sphere, the manosphere, the podcast world. And I do see how this misinformation is appealing to the sense of anxiety and fear and helplessness. Elle named a wonderful list of really, really poignant things we should be all having our eye on in our own networks. And I guess I would add to that by saying, as we organize on the left, regardless of from where, in a political party, community organization, whatever, I am always thinking about the language I'm using, and I'm always thinking about who's in the room and how we make people feel like this is your family, this is your home, you're part of this. And we are moving towards equity. And as Elle said, it's going to help everybody if we do that. Because I think in the absence of that, what we are seeing is a very organized, conscious attempt to split working class voters, a multiracial working class that we have in this country, particularly young men, as I have discovered from my own connections in my own family, in my own community, is being weaponized against friends. And it has a corrosive impact. I notice the way, and I'll end on this, Robin, I notice the way I interact with others changes almost directly linked to the amount of time I spend online looking at conversations versus the amount of conversations I have in person, in meetings, with people in struggle doing work in the community. And that's where I'm laser focused on that. And I think given the amount of pressure and the amount of anxiety people are under, given the amount of suffering in our communities right now, it would really be a good idea for all of us, regardless of where we're doing it from, thinking about how we continue to push for equity, but we continue to try to bring people in.
Anyone else on that one, or we go to the next audience question? Okay. Well, this one came in. Actually, we were talking a little bit about this in a heated way before we formally began the panel tonight. The question, Elle, your passion for Palestine touches my heart. Do you think that Carney's statement last week has weight? If not, what do you suggest? And I'm sure others will want to weigh in on this as well.
I was going off about this right before this, and I was saying, I mean, we've also seen this process with Biden. Like every few months, we'd hear Biden's really done with Netanyahu now, and then he would ship more weapons. So this is part of this process where we hear like, okay, now we're really over it. If you don't stop, we're really going to do something. Well, do it then, because it's long past the point to do it. So even though we're now having these so-called, harsh words for Israel, we haven't put in a weapons ban. We haven't sanctioned settlers. We haven't gone to the UN and voted on anything. We haven't expelled the Israeli ambassador. We haven't put a boycott. We haven't banned Israel from international sports and cultural, et cetera, all the demands that people have had. So this is part of the process of actually extending the genocide. And I said I thought it was extremely cowardly because the same people who have for months not only funded Israel, who have repressed our rights in an unprecedented manner here at home, so have completely destroyed free expression, the right to protest, who have come to our jobs, our work, our lives, tried to force everybody out of public life, particularly in things like medicine and law, universities. We've seen our institutions completely arrest their students for protesting. All of this has happened here, never mind that what we know is hundreds of thousands of lives lost in Gaza. So the least of it is what has happened to us. These lives have been lost and they're not coming back. Those lives can never be reclaimed. And we had 18, 19 months where people said, this is a genocide. This is happening. That we stop supporting it, do something. And we were told you were anti-Semites, that we were hateful, that we hated Israel, that, we were for terrorists, etc. And now those same people that know the blood is on their hands want to say we didn't think this would happen. What a shock. Oh, you're blocking humanitarian aid. Yes, they've been blocking humanitarian aid from the start, and they told us they were. It wasn't a secret. They got on the news and they said, truck will not enter Gaza. And we were told that noticing that made us somehow hateful. So, in fact, I actually said that in some ways I would prefer they just held to their position because this is gaslighting. I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay.
So, yeah, calling for another investigation, let's investigate ourselves again. So,
anybody else?
Okay, Mike.
Oh, Carl, you haven't. Go ahead, Carl. Happy to go.
No, I'm more curious as to what you want to say because, like Libby in our opening conversation, I felt more hopeful about. I saw that in a very different way that maybe, we have the BRICS and we have the G7, the G8. Maybe we have a new Canada, Britain, France group here trying to carve some kind of rollout in the world. But I mean, I'm sensitive to the cynicism that Ella's expressed. I'm curious as to what you think, Mike.
I do think it's switching. Like now that people are seeing, because they are seeing, when we're hearing 14,000 babies dead in the next 24 hours, I do think it's switching. For the first time ever, we're like seeing headlines aloud. But I think that's a cynical switch, is what I'm saying. I don't think it's out of any compassion or humanity for Palestinians. I think it's rats trying to save their own lives, leaving a sinking ship. That's what I think.
Mike, any thoughts on the statement?
I would just offer in the last parliamentary session where a win was seen. Why did that happen? The first time the Prime Minister even said the word ceasefire was days after Muslim donors removed money from the Liberal Party, and the Palestinian communities across the country made their voices heard. When UNRWA was paused funding and then refunded, again, that was activists and others across the country who put that pressure on. And so I would put forward, I would be looking at actions like the arms embargo that Elle mentioned. They have been twisting themselves in a pretzel, talking about different, that we continue, Canada is complicit in the genocide in terms of sending arms to Israel, for example. And so I would be pointing to the arms embargo that has been committed to in a motion of parliament over a year and a half ago that was watered down. I'd look at recognizing the state of Palestine. How does the government talk about a two-state solution if they won't recognize that one of the two states even exists, or that there's conditions for that state to exist? Those are some pretty specific actions that have been called for long before the genocide. That I think gets to some of what I think the beginnings of what Elle was getting at, to say outside of words. Some UN votes have started to shift, but those are very specific actions that this government should have taken a long time ago.
Joel?
Well, the one thing I would say here, and I apologize if it sounds abstract, I think we have to recognize from a liberal mindset that having the corollary to one's philosophical beliefs about human rights have economic impacts is a non-starter. I've always thought of like liberal colleagues as, looking on the spectrum of politics. As a socialist, I'm here. I believe in economic democracy. I believe in creating positive opportunity for people. I believe that that's the way we treat the implementation of our ideas, not just in negative liberty and in rights, but actually having tangible offers. So when we target a country, be it Israel or Saudi Arabia or whomever, with human rights abuses, as Canadians did in the 1980s, when we targeted South Africa, there are conscious ways in which we follow up our words with economic action. So the Liberal Party and many Liberal friends who I have a difficult time shifting from principle to economic action. But I will say, in the 80s, it was a conservative prime minister that actually, Brian Mulroney, that actually opened the door to this. And I will hold out hope, naive as it may be, that there may be people in the government right now willing to make that jump. If they make that jump, I will be there to support them. I absolutely will be there to support them. If Canada wants to take a stage that it has nationally, internationally, to say that we are effective immediately, calling for the withdrawal of all Canadian directories of funds, be they through private, be they through public means, into the state of Israel, given that's been cited by the ICC, given that we are seeing unfolding catastrophe, I think it would be wonderful to have the resurrection of that mass movement for peace that we had in the 1980s, Libby. And I think Elle's right, the larger narrative is shifting. So I think it's on us in our communities to continue to apply the pressure to the government and to leave our tent as open as it can be to see who's going to come in to stand up for justice in this moment. The pressure I am feeling from people who have direct family members in Palestinian communities and in Israeli communities as well, left Israelis, is that they want to see a mass movement for peace in this country. And I will not give up on the fact that can happen.
Excellent. That's a great message to end on. And that is all the time for questions we have today. Thank you to all of our wonderful guests, Mike, Joel, Elle, and Karl, for joining us today. Our live political panel Off the Hill will return on June 18th. And thank you, as always, to Rabble for hosting tonight's panel. And if you'd like to support the show and the other great work that Rabble does, please consider becoming a monthly donor at rabble.ca/donate. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this great conversation tonight, and we'll see you all on June 18th.
Thanks,
Bye.
Robin. Thanks, everyone.
Take
Thanks
care,
for hosting,
everybody.
folks. Thanks for listening.
Bye.